This tutorial is on Lab 1. This is the first web page that my students are going to create. It's a very basic web page. In fact, let me bring it up. It's based on a website that I designed called Amigos. It's a Mexican restaurant. I apologize to any other businesses that may have actually have this exact name. I tried to come up with something unique, but obviously I think that there even is a restaurant called Amigos in Savannah, Georgia. So no copyright infringement was intended here. I tried to come up with a unique name with a unique icon, and lo and behold, it's very hard to be unique these days, I guess. The idea of this lab is to explore the block elements of HTML. We're not going to go over all of the block elements. There's quite a few of them that we can cover, that especially like lists and tables. I want to go over the basic block elements, paragraph tags, heading level tags, block quotes, and such, address. We won't be going over all of them, obviously, just the basic ones to show you, to basically create this page right here that we see. So what do we see? We see an image. We see what looks to be a horizontal line. We see some text that appears to be a header or some kind of a heading. Another text that appears to be an address, and so on. So what we're going to do with this lab is, let me bring this lab over to, let me bring up, I lost my, there it is. Let me push this over to the left and push it down so that I have the Lab 1 doc loaded and ready to go. And I have my Chrome browser running up here on the top right. And I have my Visual Studio Code running over here as a whole on the left. So to start with Amigos, I highly recommend that you go through the doc step by step. But for those who don't have the doc in front of them, I will go through also the doc step by step. It should be a pretty short tutorial. First thing we always do for every lab is going to create the basic HTML structure. Now we can do that manually, or we can do that by simply typing in an Emmet exclamation point and tab, and it creates our basic HTML structure. There is more here than we really need. For example, this meta viewport and this meta HTTP equiv. We really don't need this right now. We're not using anything that, we don't have any HTML where this even comes into play. So I'm just going to delete them. The same thing could be for the char set. I'm not using anything in particular, like any sort of special characters that really require that I use the char set. In fact, I don't think I am. I can go back up here and check just to make sure, but I don't see any special characters in here, so I really don't need to have this char set in there, but I'm going to keep it in there anyway. It's not a bad idea to just keep it there. The title I'm going to change to Lab 1, and I'm just going to say Basic HTML. Now for this lab, it's actually quite simple. We have an amigos.txt. If you don't have the amigos.txt, you can always pause the video, type in what I'm about to put in, and then you can restart the video, which is the beauty of watching tutorials online. So, excuse me. Now, you'll notice that if I were to right-click and load amigos.html on live server and bring it up here in the browser, that there's nothing here. That's because I have nothing inside my body tag. HTML is structured in a way where I have the HTML structure, the HTML object itself. It has two children, head, which will give a description, certain descriptions, and certain things that the HTML page is going to load to help format the page and to help present the page, especially with title and meta tags and style sheets, and even JavaScript if I want to run JavaScript in my browser. Or with if I have JavaScript loaded here in HTML programmed in here, and I want my web page to be dynamic. All of your content is going to go here in the body for the most part, and I don't have any content, so there's no content loaded. My content is here in amigos.txt, and so I'm just going to copy and paste this, and I do that with a Control-A to highlight all of it. I do a Control-C to copy it, and then I come back here into Amigos and I do a Control-V. And let me change the view so that you can see all of it. So do a word wrap. And so there you go. You can pause the video and type all of that in if you don't have the amigos.txt file. So HTML describes the page. It doesn't format the page. Formatting is going to be default, whatever the browser has as a default for format. HTML's job is strictly to describe the text as it appears on the page. So we need to figure out a way to describe this text called Mexican restaurant. And we can describe text in various ways. I can describe it as a heading level 1, for example, as an H1. I can describe it as perhaps a heading level 2. I can describe it as perhaps a paragraph tag or a block quote, for example. It's completely up to the user as to how you want to describe Mexican restaurant. But in many cases, describing the overall content of the page is going to follow the same idea no matter what page you are creating. For example, I'm going to have some kind of a header in my page, and I need to have something defined as a header. Now, we're not going to get into the headings or the sections or mains quite yet. We're just going to do some very simple HTML blocking. And so for me, Mexican restaurant is my header. It's going to be a heading level 1. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, in Emmet, just do H1 Mexican restaurant and then type in tab. And now I have marked up Mexican restaurant as an H1 heading, as a heading level 1 element. If I am to save this, you'll notice that Mexican restaurant now comes up as different. Let me go back to what it used to look like so that you can see it. As you can see, there's no formatting. It's just the text, even without return statement or a return line. There's a blank line here. It doesn't show up here. HTML strips all white space and all new lines. White space is not defined by a space between two letters, but it is defined, for example, if I have, let's say I have lots of spaces between we offer and both, you'll notice that it doesn't affect the way this looks up here because it strips all white space. So I go back again and I will make H1 Mexican restaurant into a header level 1. You can do that by just typing in M1 and then put around Mexican restaurant these block quotes, these curly cues, and then Emmet will automatically create it as an H1 element. And if I save, I now have a formatted Mexican restaurant. The browser is actually defining the format for this. It's giving it a margin, so there's some space up here and some space below here. It has a size of the font. The font size itself has been blown up. Think of Microsoft Word and how you would change the size of a font. And also you'll notice that it might look bold to me. So for example, let's say I was to go in here. Let me go all the way down to the bottom here. And let me type in Mexican restaurant, for example, down here in my Microsoft Word. So Mexican restaurant. You'll notice that the font, it's specific. It's a Seg UI. The size is 12. It has no bold, italics, or underline. So if I was to change this, in marking it up, it's probably just a normal paragraph. But let's say I wanted to make this into the exact same thing that's here. Well, we have these styles over here. For example, we have subtitle, we have title, we have heading, we have its own heading 1, heading 2, heading 3. Imagine these as like heading level 1. This is heading level 2, this is heading level 3. So this is my definition of heading level 1. And if I wanted to modify, I can look at how this is modified. I can say that while the font family is Century Gothic, it has a size 16, it's got a color of blue, and it probably even has some margins around it as well. As you can see, there's a margin that separates it from the paragraph above and a margin that separates it from the paragraph below. So I wanted to show you this because header level 1 in HTML functions similarly to if you were to assign Mexican restaurant in Microsoft Word to a heading level 1. It changes the formatting. It changes it into a default formatting for in HTML. So the next part is started by 3 friends from El Paso. This is just a traditional paragraph that's just a description. So therefore, if it's just a describing paragraph, then that's what we mark it up as. I put in a P, put in a curly Q, put in an end curly Q at the end. Emmet's going to pop up, and it's going to be created as a paragraph tag. If you don't want to use Emmet, you can just simply type in P at the very beginning, and then at the very end, you type in your end tag for the paragraph. So you start the paragraph, you have the content, and then you end the paragraph markup with the end tag for paragraph. If I save that, you'll notice that now this started by 3 friends is in its own paragraph. A paragraph tag, like an H1 tag, it's called a block quote. And what a block quote means is that it takes up the entire width of the browser. So this entire Mexican restaurant is going to take up the whole width. So the next time I type in any text, it's going to end up being at the very, it's going to end up being below the H1 element, always. Paragraph tag is the same thing. It takes up the whole width. So my next text here, outside seating, is going to start below that. So what is outside seating? Well, outside seating is not an H1 because it's not the title of my page. So it's another header that can be your heading 2, for example. So I will just simply put in a heading 2 for my outside seating. H2 again is a block element, so it's going to take up the whole line, and then the next content is going to be right below it. We offer both inside and outside seating. This is another paragraph, so we change that into a paragraph by typing in a P and then curly Q, and it will create the paragraph for me. That's Emmet Shortcuts. That allows you to create, to take content and turn it into HTML format. Location and hours, I want that to have the same look and feel as outside seating. So I type in H2, curly Q, H2, hit tab, and I've marked it up as now a heading level 2. Savannah, Georgia, though, is an address, and we have a tag for address. It's ADDRESS, it's address tag. And I can put my curly Qs around address, and now I've marked up Savannah, Georgia as an address. How does that look? It looks like it's just normal text that's been italicized. But there's more to it than that. CSS allows me to make up an address in a different format. But again, all HTML does is it describes the content. Savannah, Georgia is an address, so I want to describe it as using the tag for address. I don't want to use paragraph because it's not really a paragraph, it's really describing an address. Now, Monday through Thursday, 11 a.m. to 10 p.m., that's hours, but you know, there is no such thing as a tag for hours. There really isn't. I mean, you could create one in HTML if you wanted to. HTML5 allows you to create your own tags. I don't really recommend that you create your own tags. I highly recommend that you stick to the standards and use the tags that have been created. This just allows for other people to understand what's going on. So because this is just a normal paragraph, we're just going to describe it as a paragraph. Now, one thing you could do, and I haven't gotten into this, well, actually I did with it's called address, or it's called attributes, is that I could add additional information that describes this as hours, and I could do that with a class attribute and then just type in hours. So if you wanted to add more information to the tag and you wanted to describe it it's more than just a paragraph, it's a paragraph that has and contains hours. You can use the class tag. You can also use the ID tag as well. That would also describe it. But there's a difference between ID and class. And so, for example, I could also use, instead of class, I could use ID. The difference between using an ID and a class is that IDs should describe entire sections of your page. And a class should describe various contents within your page that can sometimes repeat. So when it comes to hours, maybe that does describe an entire section of my page, so I could use that as an ID. IDs are never, they're always unique to a website. Classes can be duplicated. So for example, I could have like an entire section of prices or something like that, or I could change my H2 to be like class header, something to that effect. There's multiple headers, so I can put class header up here in this H2 as well, describing all of them as headers. It's not necessary because H2 already describes a header level, so I really don't need to have that extra information added. But this P tag in this section here, maybe I do. Maybe I want to describe it a bit more. It's not just a paragraph, it's hours. And I could use ID if it's going to be unique, or I could use class. Using class and ID is a whole tutorial in itself, so I won't get that deep into it. If I click and save, you'll notice that now my whole page has been formatted, and that's it. I've completed describing the website. What I haven't done though is I haven't formatted the website. And formatting happens entirely in CSS. And how we're going to format this website is by doing the following. I have an entire formatting layout here with a style tag, and I have all of my CSS and all of the CSS properties and values already defined. It's very simple. I would type in Control A to highlight all of it, Control C to copy it, go back into the amigos.html, and where you put this is very specific. I want you to put it inside the header, and you can put it anywhere inside the header, but it does need to go inside the header. And then we have our HTML page. Now you'll notice that the formatting is a little off. I can just simply go into Format Document, and now it'll format the document so that it looks a lot prettier. Now watch what happens to this section here when I click on Save. Big difference, very big difference, and a lot of this again is formatting. The HTML just described to me what the page, or described to the browser, this is what these content sections mean. CSS is going to say, well, I want to take this content section, this body, and I want to format it as a background color, having a margin, having a specific font family. And if I go to Microsoft Word down here, this is your font family. These are all the different kinds of fonts that I have installed in my computer. If I wanted to do a background at Microsoft Word, it would be here. I can just choose a new background. As you can see, Mexican restaurant is a block element, so it takes up the whole width of the page. H1 targets Mexican restaurant. H2 targets these headers here. I have no formatting for the paragraphs, so the paragraphs are going to automatically be just default. It'll pick up everything that the body basically does, so it'll have a background color of the same color. It'll have the font family and the default size. I also have an image tag here, but the thing is I don't have an image header or an image HTML tag defined, and that's because I'm missing the image, right? I mean, I have at the very beginning here, we have an image, and that's what this image is, this amigos.png. So what do we do to define this image? We use the image tag, and I can use Emmet to help me with this. I can just type in image, then I can type in source, and then I can type in amigos.png. I can type in alt, and I can just say restaurant logo, and then I can just type in tab, and now I have my image. My source is correct, my alt is also correct. I can type in save, and I have my image, but oops, it's not centered. The other one was centered, and that's simply just because I forgot to put in a couple of details when it comes to the image tag itself. Now, you might think to yourself, how in the world do I center an image? Well, maybe I should just type in text center or text align, and that would align the image for me, but it doesn't work. Text align center would work in general if I had display block, if I believe. No, it's actually not going to work at all with text align. Text align center is meant mostly for text. It's not meant mostly for image tags or other like font tag or form tags. But text align center could be used in that sense if we had the proper setup with the format of the tag. But a much easier and not as practical, or I should say practical, but not as a obvious way to center something is using a margin. And we set up the margin with no margin on the top or the bottom, which is what the first zero is going to mean. And then I set up the auto. And an auto margin basically means that we want to set up a specific value at the left and a specific value at the right, and it's going to push Amigos directly into the center. And this works simply because I have set the width of my image to be 300 pixels. So the width of my image doesn't take up the entirety of my web browser. An image is not a block element, so my image is only this big. If I was to put a border around it, it would only be this big. So my margin is a trick. It's going to take and put in an automatic left and an automatic right so that they're always equal, and it just pushes the logo into the center, and you'll see that it works just like that. And so the reason why I changed display block to image is because image is not necessarily a display block. It's an inline image. I'll go into inline and block images later on. And then I changed the margin to 0 auto in order to make that get automatically centered. And again, this won't work unless my image is actually smaller in width than the actual size of the browser. So this is more advanced CSS, and I really didn't want to have to describe all of this for a beginning lab, but I think it's good for you to hear this advanced stuff early, so that you can get so that you're not surprised about it when you get to it later on. Again, we could use text align, but we would have to set it up in a very specific way, and text align center is really meant mostly for text. You want to use that strictly for text. We are actually trying to align an actual element itself, not just the text. And if we're going to align elements, it's much better to use the margin property than it is to actually just align things and try to make them work with text. So again, I'm sorry for confusing you with text align. It's meant strictly and mostly for text elements, although you can set up hacks. And anyway, I've spent too much time kind of describing that. And that's the end of this lab. So I'm hoping that you are able to understand just the basics of HTML, the basics of block elements and how they work, the semantics of the elements, why we choose to use address and not P, why we might want to give more information to a block element just in case paragraph doesn't really describe it very well. How you describe your elements are going to be completely up to you, so you might decide that you might want to change things up on how you have described your content. The CSS is completely new. We haven't gotten into that, so I highly recommend that you play around with these values and you can begin to understand how they work. So I hope that this tutorial has been helpful. If you have any hints, suggestions, any ways for me to help be more clear, please leave feedback below. I greatly appreciate any feedback that you could give me about my tutorials. I'm brand new at this. And again, this is mostly for my class, which is at Benedictine Military School in Savannah. And I'm hoping that they can benefit from this as well as anybody in the public that can benefit from this. So thank you.